In this video, it's another Morris Minor 1000 Traveller. I drove one, I think it was 3 years ago, and that had the 948cc. This is the biggest engine they got, the 1098cc four-cylinder engine. So it'd be interesting to see how it compares with that car. And this represents the end of Morris Minor production. Just interesting to think about how popular these cars were, how long they were a firm family favourite. If we start ambling around the back, we can see that this Traveller, the estate car, has a lot of wood, and we have actually helped make this wood happen. This car has recently had a restoration that has seen all the wood refreshed. Considerable effort. So if you want to see an insight, look for our playlist on the Morris Minor Traveller project, and you can see how this one was completely rebuilt. So everything's stripped away because this wood is entirely structural. It should be an MOT failure if this is rotten, but sadly too often it just isn't, because I don't think testers realise how important this is to the structure of the car. So the rear is a mixture of ash and aluminium, and the rear wings are steel, as is much of the front end of the car. It's a slightly monocoque-esque structure, but like I say, the wood is an important part of that structure on these Travellers. You could have your Morris Minor as a 2-door saloon, a 4-door saloon, Traveller estate car, and they also did van and pickup versions as well. So there were quite a few different versions, and they were all hugely popular. The Travellers, I think because of the cost associated with replacing this wood, and the fact that so many of them just rotted away, the wood just falls apart in your fingers, it became quite rare and very collectible quite early on, and they're still far more sought after than the saloons. If we come around the rear, we can see we've got a pair of doors which open up to give access to a load area. We've got a little flap down here which has thumb screws, slightly fiddly, but there is a spare wheel hidden under there. And then all this has been refreshed as well. You can see where the fuel tank comes in. And the rear seat does fold for extra practicality. You just slide across these bolts here and over here. There we go. And then the seat folds down. It will fold flat, but we got stuff in at the moment preventing that. But yeah, very practical. And you think, thank you car, you think these sort of folding seats are something new, and they're just not. They've been around for a very long time. So the latest thing in 1962 was the 1098cc version of the fabled A-Series engine, first seen in the Austin A30 in 1951-52. And it became the absolute stable of the British Motor Corporation, which then owned Austin, Morris, Wolseley, Riley and MG. So this engine was used in Minis in a slightly different form. It was used in Morris Minors, the Austin A30s, and it continued right through to Maestro and Montego production, with the very last A-Series engine built in the year 2000 in the very last Mini. But what I love is look at this tiny little SU carburettor. It's no wonder these engines are not the strongest, although 48 brake horsepower was luxury to a Morris Minor. I think the 948cc was rated at 37, and the previous version, the Series 2, which used the first incarnation of A-Series engine, I can't remember what the power output was, 28 I think, and the 0 to 60 time was over 50 seconds. So when the Morris Minor 1000 came out, it absolutely transformed things. And yes, it is still a Morris Minor 1000, even though the engine is now a 1098cc. It should be an 1100, but Morris was already selling the AD016 as the 1100. It could have been quite confusing. So Morris 1000, it remained. And these Travellers were actually quite popular with the RAF, and they built up a stock when production finally ended in 1971, with the Travellers being the last of the line. The RAF stockpiled them for a time to make sure they didn't run out. I suppose the RAF perhaps used to planes being constructed out of wood, so cars constructed out of wood, no problem at all. Other elements we can see in here, we can see we've got this pipe work which feeds the heater, and then we've got the battery stashed under here, but lots of space to work on the engine. And if we come around here, you can just see the top mount, which is also a lever arm damper, as part of the Isagona's design of independent front suspension. Something that at the time of launch of the Minor in 1948 really set these cars apart. At the back, it's good old leaf spring, so it's very, very simple. But rack and pinion steering, independent front suspension, meant the Miner had handling that was way, way ahead of the competition in 1948, and still felt pretty good in the early 1970s, bar that somewhat skittish rear end. And we hop in. And of course, an advantage of having a monocoque structure without a separate chassis is the floor is actually quite low, and the sill, though strong, doesn't actually stick up too long. Do take in the tiny, tiny throttle pedal, which looks absolutely ridiculous next to my big size 10s. It's a somewhat compact layout, but it's actually quite a nice driving position. There's good visibility. You've got this big steering wheel, which of course is very tight because it's rack and pinion steering. And we've got the central speedometer as fitted to almost all Morris Miners. I think the Series MMs had a smaller one in front of the driver, but then they moved it to the middle. Makes it easier to make left-hand drive versions, and the Miner was a surprisingly good export car, even in America. And then at various stages, they either had open glove boxes or a lidded glove box. So they would sometimes fit a lidded one even on the driver's side, even though you couldn't open it because someone put a steering wheel in the way. And then they sometimes went to open boxes, and then people said, oh, no, we like the lids. So the final solution was to put one glove box lid in, which I think works quite nicely. But lovely, you got leather door pulls to pull the door shut, nice winding windows. So yeah, luxuries of their day. There is a simple heater in here. They're not desperately effective. If I just borrow the camera a moment to give you a better view. We've got this control like a Mini that you push in, and that opens up the tap and feeds the heater matrix. And then we've got a choice of car or screen or off for the heater. And if I pop the ignition on, a single speed fan. It's making a lot of noise. I'm not sure there's any air actually going anywhere. This one benefits from an electric screen wash. It would have been a push button originally. So let's do our wiper test while we can. There we go. Pop the wipers on. I've just got the camera lady. And one big improvement they did in I think 1965 is they or 64. Sorry, thinking about it. Wipers that actually overlap here in the middle. They're still single speed, but no triangle of doom. They're not quite overlapping because we ran out of screen wash, but a much better wiping pattern, because the previous design where it had effectively that wiper both sides left a huge triangle unswept in the middle, a massive triangle of disappointment. But you'll see that the seat belts just screw straight into the wood, and we've got a lovely new headliner here in the back section as well after all that work was done. The rear windows, the front half slides quite a long way back. The rear section actually slides very slightly forward. So ventilation not a problem. But can I actually get in the back? Let's give it a go. I've not tried this before. So it's going to be interesting. The seats tip. I'll talk about seat tipping in a minute. And then, excuse the rear end, I can hop in. And there we go. And my knees are slightly in the seat in front, but actually it's not quite a bad place to sit. And like I said, I've got these wide opening windows so you can get a good view of what's going on. But let's just talk passenger seat. If you just come in, this one is a fixed back, but on the earlier Miners it was a tipping seat, so the back would tip onto the seat squab and then the whole lot bundled into the front footwell to allow entry to the rear. The problem is, as my cousin discovered, if you were sat behind that seat and no one was in the front seat, you could quite easily end up in the front footwell, and she did in my aunt's Morris Minor convertible. So that was definitely bad times. Safety has improved somewhat over the ages. Right, let's fire up the 4-cylinder engine. Very responsive, very distinctive starter noise. And that wonderful exhaust trumpet at the rear. Oh, that famous exhaust trumpet, somewhat accentuated, is that the word? Exaggerated, that's the word, on this example by a stainless steel exhaust. But yeah, it's what they're famous for. It's something they managed to replicate on the smaller Sherpa and LDV vans right through to the end of that production. They would do the same sort of trumpet on the exhaust overrun. So if we build up a bit of speed, oh, there we go. Yeah, it's like having a brass band behind you. It's definitely one of the more interesting features of these cars. So when they moved to the 948cc engine in the original Miner 1000, that took the top speed to 75 miles an hour, but these can top 80. We're not going to top 80 along this lane, no, I don't think. I don't think that'd be safe. We're still on non-servo all-drum brakes, so the stopping power is still not what you call breathtaking. You're not going to test your seatbelts with this level of braking. But nonetheless, I think the when they put the 1100 engine in, they did boost the braking somewhat. Oh, we can go in second. Unleash 48 brake horsepower. Yeah, performance is still gentle. You don't buy a Morris Minor for performance. But yeah, they just track so well because of the lovely steering. Even though this steering wheel is enormous, they just go perfectly straight. You're not having to fight it all over the road. The Austin A35, by way of example, and a very fitting one because it's an in-house rival effectively, still on the steering box, and because they're very narrow, they always feel a little more precarious going down the road. Whereas this is lovely. The only problem being that we're driving at about 55 miles an hour and I'm crying out for more gears. Despite the fact these cars were built in the motorway era, they're still not best at home on them. Better suited to popping to the local village shop to buy some stamps. Yeah, this is a bit more like it. Rather than trying to make progress on the major roads, go onto the smaller roads, just sit back, enjoy the views and just relax. And you kind of can, because they feel fairly sure-footed, allowing for the limitations of a simple live rear axle and tractors. Well, they were smiling quite nicely, and that's what happens when you drive around in a Morris Minor. Other people just love them. There are plenty of smiles and waves of appreciation. Yeah, those brakes really do need a good shove, and I'm now wary of other tractors or Vauxhall Mockers, where a big, small, narrow car is definitely advantageous. But yeah, the way these cars turn in is just beautiful. Alec Izagonis did know what he was doing. He actually wanted to go far more advanced. He wanted independent rear suspension and a flat 4 engine for the Minor, but the bean counters at what was then Morris were like, no, we won't be doing that, Mr. Izagonis. They recognised that they had to make it profitable, and for all his engineering prowess, and by heck did he have some, Izagonis was not the best at seeing things from any other point of view than pure engineering. He always wanted everything, and to heck with the cost. The ride's actually really comfortable. It's slightly bouncy, but given the limitations of leaf springs, it's not actually that bad at all. So that front suspension, that lever arm damper is the upper link, and that's also seen on a lot of MGs, and you don't see people complaining about the handling of an MG very often. So it's simple technology, but it does work. But back in the day, engine conversions were very common on the Morris Minors. Fiat twin cam engine was very popular because all the Fiats rusted away, but their engines lived on. People would even shove Rover V8s in because there's such a generous amount of space there. You can do that, and even today people are still modifying these cars. Yeah, it's not difficult to see what the charm is with these cars. Fast they're not, but you can actually hustle them fairly well. I'm not going to hustle this one, this isn't my car, and it's in very lovely condition. Yeah, you can actually push on quite well in them. And of course, so many tuning mods, you didn't have to spot the engine, you can tune up the A-Series engine. 1275 conversions are very common. You can put 5-speed gearboxes in, disc front brakes. There's an awful lot you can do to a Miner to make it just a bit more acceptable for daily driving. And that's actually something I would love to do one day. It's not that I want to go around a racetrack, just want something that's a bit more capable in modern traffic, a bit more happy at motorway speeds. And all those parts exist. I have just noticed one oversight which people might notice from a modern car point of view. There is no temperature gauge. So the only way of knowing if your Morris Minor is overheating is if steam starts pouring out from under the bonnet, which is generally a situation considered undesirable. So again, the aftermarket world will supply you with a temperature gauge. Well, there you go. That is the sheer joy of the Morris Minor. All these decades later, they still remain one of the most charming, delightful classic cars you can own. And in traveller form, so practical as well. You can take the family with you, dogs. You can fold the rear seat down, chuck all your rubbish in, go to the tip. You can do all sorts. Just a joyous little car to drive. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget you can head to the Hubnut store if you want to buy lovely merchandise. And otherwise, we shall see you in a future video. Farewell. We forgot something important. Oh. It's harvest season.
Yeah. And it's the first sunny day in a little while.
Yeah. So just when you think you're in the middle of nowhere, lots of trucks and tractors.